I mean, just imagine trying to buy your first home today, right? You are staring down a mortgage rate of 6.5%. And then, at the very same time, a tech billionaire is mapping out this plan to put artificial intelligence data centers in outer space.
Right, literally in orbit.
Yeah, in space.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, the U.S. government is quietly trying to build a multi-billion-dollar Bitcoin fortress. It is just wild. So welcome to your highlights of the day, right here on the NovaStream 24/7 broadcast.
Glad to be here. There's just so much moving on the board today.
Yeah, totally. And whether you are tracking the live crypto markets on our side panel or, watching the global financial indices tick by, or just catching up on the auto-curated breaking news feed from finance, politics, and tech, we are thrilled you're hanging out with us.
Absolutely. The feed has been lighting up all morning.
I mean, I am looking at today's sources, and we are tracking this massive, interconnected story. It is really a tale of geopolitical shocks, some incredibly stubborn inflation, and how both Silicon Valley and Washington are just scrambling to hoard the ultimate assets of the future.
It is a remarkable moment to observe, really, because when you look at the raw data coming across the terminals today, you see traditional systems under immense visible stress.
Oh, for sure. Visible is the right word.
Yeah, but simultaneously, the blueprints for an entirely new economic and technological paradigm are just being drawn up in real time. I mean, we are seeing a complete redefinition of what constitutes a strategic asset.
So I want to start with that traditional system stress because I'm looking at our indices feed right now. And honestly, it reminds me of driving an older car. You know when that check engine light just starts blinking on the dashboard?
Oh, yeah, the dreaded blinking light.
Right. It is a glaring warning. You literally feel the engine sputtering. But it feels like politicians in Washington keep putting a piece of black tape over that light, just pretending the car is running fine.
While everyday home buyers are the ones actually broken down on the side of the road.
Yes, that is a perfect way to put it.
Well, that blinking check engine light, that is the bond market. And one of our sources today phrased it in such a brilliant way. They said the bond market is the only adult in American politics.
Ah, I love that.
Right. Because it doesn't vote, it doesn't flatter anyone, and it really doesn't care about campaign promises. It simply prices in reality.
And reality right now is looking pretty expensive.
Yeah, what the bond market is pricing in right now is a stubborn structural inflation problem that, frankly, nobody in power wants to admit is actually happening.
So let's look at the actual numbers hitting the consumer, because they are rough. The average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage just jumped to 6.51%.
Wow.
Yeah, that is up from 6.36% just last week, which puts us at an 8-month high. Even the 15-year fix is now sitting at 5.85%.
And that jump doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
Right, I know this ties back to the geopolitical reality we were talking about, specifically the ongoing U.S.-Iran conflict. But how does a flare-up in the Middle East translate to someone in Ohio suddenly not being able to afford a house? Like, what is the actual link there?
The causal chain is incredibly direct, even if it feels far away. So it all starts with the disruption of energy flows in the Persian Gulf.
Oh.
When geopolitical instability hits that specific region, it restricts the global supply of oil and natural gas. And that sudden restriction pushes energy costs up.
Because supply is choked off.
Exactly. Well, yes, supply drops, price goes up. But here is the critical mechanism. Energy is the foundational input for the entire global economy. When fuel costs rise, the cost of manufacturing goods rises.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the cost of shipping those goods across the ocean rises. The cost of trucking them to your local supermarket rises.
So it basically cascades into the price of literally everything.
Spot on. And the bond market sees this cascade forming. Traders immediately realize, hey, this isn't a temporary blip. This is a prolonged bout of inflation.
And inflation is the enemy of bonds, right?
Yeah, because when they fear long-term inflation, they demand higher returns on U.S. government debt to compensate for the dollar losing its purchasing power over time. So Treasury yields go up.
Right, specifically the 10-year Treasury note, which I see ticking up on the NovaStream feed right now.
Yes, the 10-year. Now, mortgage rates are heavily pegged to that 10-year yield. Lenders use it as their baseline. So when the yield spikes because of oil disruptions in the Middle East, the baseline cost of borrowing money in the U.S. spikes too.
Which pushes that 30-year mortgage over 6.5%.
Right. Traders are pricing in the very real risk that the Federal Reserve might have to just abandon any thought of cutting rates and might even have to introduce rate hikes to fight this new inflationary wave.
Man. And, while that 6.5% is still down from the brutal peak of, what, 7.79% we saw back in 2023?
Yeah, late 2023.
Right, but returning to this 6.5 level right now is just a massive blow to the spring home buying season. It locks prospective buyers out, and it forces potential sellers to just cling to their existing low-rate mortgages. It freezes the whole market.
It really does.
But this concept of weaponizing resources, of energy acting as a geopolitical pressure cooker, that isn't just happening in the Middle East. It's actually happening right in our own hemisphere.
Oh, definitely. The situation unfolding with Cuba is a masterclass in how access to fuel dictates the absolute survival of a nation. We are watching an incredible escalation of strategy from Washington.
Yeah, the sources have a major update on this today, May 20, 2026, which is Cuban Independence Day. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio released a very rare video message.
Very rare.
And what stood out to me is that he didn't address the Cuban government at all. He addressed the Cuban people directly, urging them to bypass their leadership and partner with the Trump administration to build a, quote, new Cuba.
It is a bold move.
Yeah, and he explicitly blamed the country's severe shortages not on the long-standing U.S. embargo, which is usually the talking point, but on internal corruption. And he specifically targeted a group called JASA.
Right?
So what is JASA and why are they the main focal point here?
So JAS is a massive military-run business conglomerate in Cuba. It was originally founded by Raul Castro. And to understand the target Rubio is painting here, you really have to grasp their scale.
Okay, how big are we talking?
This single conglomerate allegedly holds $18 billion in assets.
Wait, 18 billion?
And they control roughly 70% of the entire Cuban economy.
That is insane, 70%.
Right. They manage the tourist resorts, the gas stations, the supermarkets, the import-export logistics, all of it. Rubio's accusation is that JASA is siphoning resources to build luxury hotels for foreign tourists, while ordinary Cuban citizens are enduring blackouts.
And those blackouts are lasting up to 22 hours a day right now, right?
Yeah, up to 22 hours.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Washington's response is an offer of $100 million in humanitarian aid for food and medicine. But there is a massive catch.
There always is.
Right. The funds will only be routed through independent groups like the Catholic Church. They are setting a strict condition that JASA cannot touch a single cent of that money.
And that is the leverage point.
Yeah.
But, to understand the true weight of this video message, you really have to look at the broader, highly aggressive U.S. pressure campaign surrounding it, because this didn't just start today.
Right. There is a lot of context here.
Earlier this year, the U.S. pushed for the ouster of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, and following that, Washington imposed a strict naval blockade. That blockade effectively cut off Cuba's primary source of subsidized foreign oil.
Oh, which totally explains the 22-hour blackouts.
Yeah.
They literally have no fuel to run their power grids.
Exactly. The island's domestic fuel reserves have completely dried up, and if that coordinated economic squeeze wasn't enough, just hours around the release of Rubio's video, the U.S. Justice Department unsealed a criminal indictment.
Against Raul Castro, right?
Yeah, against 94-year-old Raul Castro for murder, stemming from the 1996 shoot-down of 2 civilian brothers to the rescue aircraft.
So let me get this straight. You have a naval blockade choking off the oil, a legal indictment targeting the historical leadership, and a public message offering cash directly to the citizens if they bypass the current regime.
It is a full-court press.
It really is.
Yeah.
And looking at the board, Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez called the video deeply cynical. He labeled it an economic siege, meant to turn Cuba back into a neocolonial appendix of the United States.
Which is their standard diplomatic defense, yeah.
Sure, and just to be clear for the listeners, we aren't endorsing Rubio's strategy or Cuba's defense here. We are just tracking the chess moves. But mapping out these moves raises an incredible dilemma.
What is that?
Well, when a nation's fuel is completely cut off by a naval blockade, does an offer of $100 million in conditional aid actually spark a democratic revolution? Or does it just deepen a catastrophic crisis for the people living in the dark?
That is the defining tension of this economic strangulation strategy. The architectural goal from the U.S. side is to break the elite's hold on resources without triggering a mass humanitarian disaster.
Which is a very fine line to walk.
It is. By cutting off the subsidized Venezuelan oil, the U.S. fundamentally altered the resource control dynamics in the Caribbean. But the reality on the ground shows that ordinary citizens, the ones sitting through those 22-hour blackouts, they're the ones bearing the brunt of the immediate impact.
It is a stark reminder of how power is ultimately just the control over vital resources.
Yeah.
And, that same desperate race for unassailable infrastructure that we're seeing with physical oil in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
That is what is playing out right now in the tech sector with artificial
Oh,
intelligence.
without a doubt.
Because the U.S. isn't just fighting geopolitical wars over physical territory anymore. Washington is terrified of losing the digital resource war to China.
And that fear is drastically altering domestic policy. I mean, the battleground has shifted from physical commodities to AI preeminence. And we saw a massive development on that front today from the Oval Office, showing just how far the government is willing to step back.
Yeah, to just let domestic tech companies run wild. The Oval Office development was crazy. President Trump abruptly postponed his own executive order on artificial intelligence just hours before the signing ceremony.
Just pulled the plug.
Yeah, at the absolute last minute.
Yeah.
From the draft we saw in the sources, this order would have established a framework for reviewing what they call frontier models before they could be released to the public.
Yeah.
Can you break down what a frontier model actually is?
Sure. So a frontier model isn't your standard customer service chatbot. It refers to the next generation of highly capable foundational AI systems that could theoretically pose severe national security risks.
Like what kind of risks?
Things like designing novel biological weapons or executing massive autonomous cyber attacks.
Okay, so the really scary stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So the executive order called for a voluntary collaboration framework. Developers building these massive systems would be asked to share their models with the NSA and the National Cyber Director.
For like a security audit.
Right, for security evaluations up to 90 days before a public launch.
But Trump killed it. He stated he didn't like certain aspects of the text and warned it could have been a blocker.
And that word blocker is everything you need to know. Washington has essentially calculated that the risk of stifling the American tech industry's competitive edge against China is far greater than the domestic risks posed by unregulated AI.
Wow.
They are choosing speed and innovation over safety and regulation purely because they view AI dominance as a critical national security imperative.
Which acts as a massive green light for tech megacaps to spend money like we have never seen in the history of capitalism.
Oh, the spending is astronomical.
I mean, NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, just introduced the Vera CPU, targeting a brand new $200 billion total addressable market.
$200 billion, it is hard to even fathom.
It is. But I really want to look at what Elon Musk's xAI is doing, because the numbers here are staggering. Our sources show xAI generated $818 million in revenue on their Grok platform recently.
Which sounds great on paper.
Yeah, it does. But then they ran an operating loss of $2.47 billion.
Just a massive burn rate.
And it gets worse. Between 2023 and the end of 2025, they booked $18.8 billion in capital expenditures. Wait, let's stop there. $18.8 billion out the door to make a fraction of that back.
Yep.
If any normal company did that, their board would fire the CEO immediately. How is this level of cash burn sustainable?
Because they aren't building a normal consumer product. They are trying to build the foundational infrastructure of the next century. Like, NVIDIA isn't just providing picks and shovels for a gold rush. That analogy is too small.
Okay, so what is a better analogy?
NVIDIA is the only company selling the concrete to build the launch pad. It doesn't matter whose rocket eventually wins the AI race. They all need the concrete to launch.
Oh, that makes sense.
And companies like xAI are buying up that concrete at unprecedented volumes because the first entity to achieve unassailable AI infrastructure essentially controls the economic future.
But the ambition is bleeding into science fiction at this point. Musk is forecasting putting AI data centers in actual orbit within the next 2 to 3 years.
Which is incredibly fast.
Even Jeff Bezos came out today and criticized that timeline, calling it probably not right and a little ambitious.
Well, Bezos' critique highlights the immense physical and logistical reality checking that ambition. Putting data centers in space requires solving massive radiation problems.
And thermal management, right. Space is extreme.
Yeah, thermal management, bandwidth challenges. But the reason Musk is pushing so hard and burning so much capital is because Washington has effectively outsourced the tech Cold War to Silicon Valley.
They are letting the megacaps run.
Exactly.
And all of that massive tech spending and that space ambition connects perfectly to the live crypto markets you are watching tick by on the NovaStream feed right now.
It really does all tie together.
Because to fund that kind of capital expenditure, you need an ironclad balance sheet. Which brings us to SpaceX's upcoming June 2026 IPO.
A highly anticipated IPO.
Oh, the market is salivating. They are targeting a valuation between $1.5 and $2 trillion, posting $18.7 billion in revenue for 2025. But the real shocker hidden in their SEC filing today was their crypto portfolio.
This was a revelation that completely blindsided institutional analysts, because previous estimates floating around Wall Street suggested SpaceX held somewhere around 8,000 Bitcoin.
But the filing revealed they hold an astonishing 18,712 Bitcoin.
It is massive.
That is more than double what anyone thought. They spent about $661 million acquiring it over time, and at today's price hovering around $77,628 per coin, that stack is valued at roughly $1.45 billion.
And you can see why retail sentiment on platforms like StockTwits is reading as extremely bullish right now.
Oh, absolutely. But I have to bring up the contrast here. You have SpaceX quietly hoarding a massive digital treasury, while on the other hand, you have Mark Cuban recently selling off most of his Bitcoin.
Yes. Cuban noted his deep frustration that Bitcoin failed to act as a safe haven hedge during the initial shock of the U.S.-Iran conflict.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Well, during that immediate market stress, he noted that physical gold rallied while Bitcoin's price dropped, and he felt it basically failed its core use case. So he decided to favor Ethereum instead.
But the data completely contradicts his timeline. Like, looking at our historical charts for that exact U.S.-Iran conflict window, Bitcoin actually surged by more than 16%.
It did, yeah.
While physical gold dropped over 15%. Cuban dumping his Bitcoin based on that logic feels like, I don't know, jumping off a winning horse right before the finish line. Why the disconnect?
The disconnect stems from the difference between the risk on reality and the digital gold thesis.
What do you mean?
So Cuban experienced the initial immediate liquidity sell-off. When a sudden geopolitical shock hits, algorithms and panicked investors sell whatever asset is most liquid to raise cash immediately.
And Bitcoin trades 247.
Exactly. So it often takes the very first hit, dropping briefly. Cuban viewed that temporary drop as a fundamental failure. But institutional investors, and clearly mega corporations like SpaceX, they're looking at the longer-term macro duration.
They ride out the initial panic.
Right. Once the initial panic subsides, the digital gold thesis takes over. Over the full duration of the conflict, Bitcoin heavily outperformed physical metals as a non-sovereign store of value.
And it isn't just Elon Musk and Wall Street institutions looking at that long-term data. The U.S. government itself is aggressively entering the crypto hoarding game. That is the biggest news of the week, really.
We are tracking Representative Nick Begich introducing the ARMA bill today, the American Reserve Modernization Act. The goal is to formally codify a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve into permanent federal law.
And this legislation is incredibly aggressive in its scope. It authorizes the Treasury Department to acquire up to 200,000 Bitcoin annually for 5 years.
Targeting an eventual reserve of 1 million Bitcoin.
Yeah, 1 million. But the most critical detail is the holding requirement. All federal Bitcoin, including the assets they have seized in criminal cases over the years, must be locked in deep cold storage for a minimum of 20 years.
A 20-year lockup. That is conviction. And they are structuring it to be budget neutral, which is the crazy part.
Yeah, that is very clever.
The outline says they will use Federal Reserve remittances and gold certificate revaluations to fund the purchases without taxing citizens. Can you explain how that actually works? Because to me, it sounds like financial alchemy.
It basically is financial alchemy, but it is an accounting mechanism allowed under existing law.
Okay.
So the Treasury Department holds physical gold at a statutory price set decades ago, around $42 an ounce.
Which is way below current market price.
Way below. The ARMA bill allows the Treasury to revalue that gold closer to current market prices, which are vastly higher. When they revalue it on paper, they can issue new gold certificates to the Federal Reserve.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the Fed then credits the Treasury's account with new dollars based on that higher valuation. The Treasury then takes those newly minted ledger dollars and buys Bitcoin on the open market.
So they're literally monetizing the paper gains on their physical gold to buy digital gold.
Completely bypassing the need to ask Congress for taxpayer funds.
That is absolutely wild. They are printing money against old gold to buy new Bitcoin.
Right.
It shows how seriously they're treating digital scarcity. They're treating it as base layer global collateral.
Setting up a modern-day Fort Knox.
Which leaves us with a massive provocative question to end on. Because if we step back and look at today's sources, we have traditional systems fracturing.
Clearly.
Mortgage rates at 6.5% are locking everyday people out of the American dream. global conflicts are shutting off the oil taps.
Mm.
So are we watching a real-time transfer of global power from traditional nation-states to megacorporations holding billions in private AI infrastructure and decentralized Bitcoin?
It certainly looks that way.
I mean, think about it. If the U.S. government feels the need to use accounting tricks to lock up 1 million Bitcoin for 20 years just to stay economically secure, what does that fundamentally say about their confidence in the future of the dollar?
We are witnessing the architecture of the next century being built directly inside the shell of the old one. The rules of economic gravity are shifting right in front of us.
It brings us right back to that dashboard metaphor. If the check engine light on the traditional economy is flashing red, it seems like the biggest players in the world aren't even trying to fix the old engine anymore.
No, they are just hoarding the parts to build an entirely new space-age vehicle.
That wraps up our highlights of the day. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, NovaStream is streaming 24/7. Keep your eyes on the side panel for those live crypto charts, index updates, and the breaking news you need to stay ahead. Have a great day, and we will catch you on the stream.